last year when my wife and I attended, we knew we were expecting our first child. No one else did at the time, but we did. And I remember...
What if everything Prince Harry believed about his wife was a lie, and a hidden child proves it? It was supposed to be a new beginning, a fresh chapter written far from the shadows of Buckingham Palace. For Prince Harry, stepping away from royal duties meant freedom. Freedom to love, to heal, to raise a family, and to define his identity beyond the gilded cage of royal legacy. The decision wasn't easy. He walked away from titles, responsibility, and tradition, all for one woman, Meghan Markle. To the world, it was a story of defiance and devotion. But behind the polished smiles and global headlines lay a reality that was slowly unraveling. And now, in a revelation that has reportedly left Prince Harry emotionally shattered, that reality has exploded. Before we continue, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. According to several sources close to the situation, Prince Harry recently received the results of a private DNA investigation. Results that confirmed something so staggering, so emotionally devastating, that the prince himself allegedly collapsed on the spot. The results revealed that Meghan Markle, his wife, and the mother of their 2 children, has another child. A child she allegedly kept hidden. A child she never told Harry about. And worse, that child isn't a baby. The child is nearly a teenager. Let that sink in. For nearly a decade, Meghan Markle allegedly carried a secret so consequential that its exposure has now sent shockwaves through royal circles, tabloid empires, and the very foundation of the Sussex marriage. The child, according to the claims, has been raised privately in the United States under a different name, with no public acknowledgement, no paparazzi glimpses, and no mentions in Meghan's countless interviews, documentaries, or memoirs. In a world obsessed with transparency and truth, how could such a secret be buried for so long, and what happens now that it's been unearthed? The story didn't break in the tabloids first. This didn't come from a paparazzi tip or a leaked hospital record. It began with a whisper, an anonymous message sent to a royal aide several months ago. The message was short, almost cryptic, but it changed everything. It read, "He doesn't know about the child. Ask her about 2010. Those 8 words lit a fire beneath years of unease, of unanswered questions, of timelines that didn't fully align. And for Prince Harry, they triggered something deeper, an instinct that something was being hidden from him, something big. So he did what anyone would do when faced with the possibility that their entire marriage may have been built on a lie. He launched a private investigation. Discreet. Confidential. Beyond the reach of royal protocol or media exposure. He didn't tell Meghan. He didn't tell anyone outside his inner circle. He hired a private investigator from Los Angeles, a former federal agent turned elite freelance operator, known for tracking down biological parents and uncovering deep-buried secrets. The brief was simple. Look into Meghan's life before she met Harry. And especially look into 2010. What the investigator found wasn't just surprising, it was explosive. There were inconsistencies, gaps in travel records, a mysterious year-long absence from film and TV roles, medical visits registered under aliases, a single address in a quiet Californian suburb where a young boy, now aged around 12, was reportedly being raised by a woman known only to a few close friends of Meghan's past life. But it wasn't until the DNA came back that the dots fully connected. Sources say that Prince Harry collapsed after receiving the confirmation. He wasn't in the UK, nor in Montecito. He was on a solo trip, perhaps attempting to clear his mind or plan his next steps in private. The call came from the lab. The voice on the other end didn't hesitate. It was a 99.9% match. Meghan Markle is the biological mother of the boy. There was no room for doubt. No way to rationalize it away. The weight of the truth hit him like a freight train. Now the world is beginning to learn what he allegedly discovered weeks ago. The fallout is already underway. According to insiders, Harry hasn't spoken publicly about it, not even to friends in his circle. He's withdrawn, distracted. The once confident man who took on the British media, who gave explosive interviews and stood by his wife through every storm, is reportedly reeling. Not because he's afraid of the headlines, not because of the public humiliation, but because the person he trusted most, the woman he gave up everything for, may have withheld the most critical truth of all, the existence of another child. And the questions only multiply. Who is the child's father? Why did Meghan keep it a secret? Did she ever plan to tell Harry? Is this the end of their marriage, or just the beginning of a deeper war? This video is going to unpack everything, every shocking detail, every moment of emotional fallout, every clue that was missed or ignored. You'll hear from insiders, legal experts, psychologists, and royal historians. We'll take you through Meghan's forgotten years, the secret timeline, the DNA process, and the emotional trauma Harry is now navigating. This isn't just about scandal. This is about betrayal, identity, and the crumbling of trust. So stay with us, because by the end of this video, you'll see how a hidden chapter in Meghan Markle's life has torn open a wound inside Prince Harry that may never fully heal. We'll follow the story from the moment the suspicion started, through the investigation, to the DNA test, and the emotional collapse of a prince who once believed he had finally escaped the royal curse of deception and half-truths. This isn't a tabloid rumor. This is a story that's shaking the very pillars of what we thought we knew about Harry and Meghan's world. If you think you've heard it all before, think again, because everything changes right now. Are you ready to see the truth behind the silence? Then let's begin. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stood before the world on that spring afternoon in 2018, they were more than a royal couple. They were a symbol, a modern fairy tale, a union of royalty and celebrity, tradition and progress. Every camera in the world pointed at Windsor Castle. Every headline screamed of history being made. A biracial American actress marrying a prince born into the most iconic monarchy on earth. For many, it was hope wrapped in royal regalia. But what no one saw behind the golden curtain was how carefully every frame of that fairy tale had been constructed and how dangerously thin the foundation really was. To understand why the recent DNA revelations hit Prince Harry so hard, one must understand how deeply he believed in the story he was sold. Meghan wasn't just a partner, she was his redemption. For a man haunted by the trauma of his mother's death, tormented by years of media scrutiny, and alienated by the institution he was born into, Meghan became his reason to escape, his cause, his safe space. The moment they began dating in secret back in 2016, Harry made it his mission to protect her from everything he couldn't protect his mother from. And Meghan? She played the part seamlessly. Poised, articulate, philanthropic, and outspoken in the way the monarchy never dared to be. She was everything Harry admired. Independent, media-savvy, a feminist, an outsider. For the first time, Harry saw a path forward that didn't involve cold palaces or centuries-old protocols. Meghan gave him a way out, a life that was his own, built on love, not lineage. The engagement announcement came swiftly. The official portrait showed them beaming, arms wrapped around each other. Meghan wore a white coat. Harry looked proudly into the cameras. The world fell in love with them. The press, at least at first, was captivated. But within the palace, something was already beginning to tremble. There were quiet concerns, unspoken, of course, about how fast things were moving. Meghan's past had been superficially examined by royal aides, but much of her early life was difficult to trace. Her relationship with her father, Thomas Markle, was described as complex. There was mention of an ex-husband, Trevor Engelson, but very little detail. Still, the palace was eager to modernize its image. Harry's choice was respected, if not entirely embraced. No one dared look too deeply. The focus remained on presenting the image. The perfect couple. The progressive monarchy. The illusion. Their wedding day was broadcast to millions. Oprah, George Clooney, Serena Williams, all in attendance. Meghan walked herself halfway down the aisle. The choir sang "Stand By Me." The bishop spoke about love conquering hate. Every element of the day was curated to signal one thing: change. Meghan's presence in the royal family was presented as a fresh breeze through an old, dusty institution. But beneath the designer gowns and heartfelt vows was something else, a meticulous narrative being built, brick by brick, image by image. A narrative in which Meghan had total control over her past, present, and future. When the two relocated to Frogmore Cottage and welcomed their first child, Archie, it seemed the illusion had transformed into a reality. Harry spoke about being a proud father. Meghan was praised for her grace and poise. They attended royal engagements, toured Africa, and gave passionate speeches about mental health, feminism, and racial equality. But behind the scenes, cracks were widening. There were reports of rifts with William and Kate, tensions with palace staff, and arguments over protocol. Meghan, it was said, struggled to adapt to the restrictions of royal life. Harry, protective as ever, sided with her against the institution. Then came the bombshell: the couple would step down as senior royals. The announcement shook the monarchy. Queen Elizabeth released a carefully worded statement. The tabloids exploded. Critics accused them of betraying duty. Supporters hailed them as trailblazers. The illusion had broken, but in its place came something even more powerful: reinvention. In California, free from royal constraints, Harry and Meghan launched their own empire. Netflix deals, Spotify podcasts, public speeches, a sprawling Montecito estate. They presented themselves as victims of a ruthless press and an outdated monarchy. Their infamous Oprah interview painted a damning portrait of life inside the palace: racism, neglect, and isolation. Meghan revealed she had suicidal thoughts. Harry said his family was trapped. They weren't just living their truth, they were selling it to the world. And for a time, it worked. They became cultural icons, celebrated on magazine covers, red carpets, and social media. Meghan was praised for her advocacy. Harry was applauded for breaking free. Together, they embodied a new brand of royalty, one that traded crowns for camera crews. But beneath that glittering new identity lay an unspoken expectation: transparency. If they were to be the voice of truth, authenticity had to be their currency. Every trauma they shared, every confession they made, bought them more sympathy, more credibility, more power. That's what makes the DNA bombshell so devastating. Because if it's true, if Meghan did indeed conceal the existence of a child from a previous relationship, it doesn't just tarnish her reputation. It undermines the very foundation upon which their new life was built. It challenges the idea that she was ever truly honest with Harry. It turns their union from a love story into a case study in deception. And it calls into question every word spoken in interviews, every accusation leveled at others, every carefully crafted narrative sold to the public. For Harry, this is more than a betrayal. It is the disintegration of a belief system. He gave up his family, his country, and his legacy for Meghan. He fought for her, defended her, protected her with a ferocity that alienated those closest to him. And now, he is forced to ask, did he really know the woman he gave everything to? Some sources suggest that Meghan's decision to conceal the child wasn't rooted in malice but in fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of losing Harry. Fear that the revelation would derail their carefully constructed image. But regardless of motive, the omission has detonated a time bomb in their relationship. Because trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild. This revelation doesn't exist in a vacuum. It ripples outward, to the royal family, to their children, to the millions who once believed in their love story. It reopens old wounds. It breathes life into old accusations. And for Harry, it likely confirms his worst fear, that even outside the palace, he is still surrounded by secrets. The perfect illusion was never about perfection. It was about control. About crafting a life so perfectly curated, so immaculately staged, that no one would dare look behind the scenes. But illusions, by nature, are temporary. Eventually, the light hits them at the wrong angle. And when they shatter, they don't just reveal the truth, they expose everything. That's where we find Prince Harry now. Not as a rebel royal or a podcast personality, but as a man standing in the ruins of the image he once believed in. A man faced with the crushing realization that the truth he fought so hard to live by may have been a lie all along. And a man who, for the first time in years, may no longer know who he can trust. The illusion had cracked, but the truth didn't come crashing in overnight. It arrived the way truth often does, not in an explosion, but in a whisper. A single message, and signed, unemotional, and unexpected. Delivered through a private channel to an aide once affiliated with the Sussexes, it contained only a few chilling words. He doesn't know about the child. Ask her about 2010. No signature. No follow-up. Just that. It could have been a prank. A smear attempt. Another tabloid trap. But it wasn't ignored. Not this time. That message sat for days, unopened, unread, or perhaps just disregarded as noise. But as fate would have it, it landed in the hands of someone who still had access to Harry, someone who remembered the strange inconsistencies Meghan once brushed off, the missing chunks of her timeline, and the guarded answers when it came to her life before she met Harry. It wasn't unusual for people to keep parts of their past to themselves. But this wasn't just private. This was buried. Harry had never seriously questioned Meghan's story. She was polished, confident, always prepared. She spoke about her childhood, her parents' divorce, her rise in Hollywood. But certain details had always been blurry. Her exact movements before Suits, her relationship with her father, her abrupt divorce from her ex-husband, Trevor Engelson, Nothing overtly suspicious, just incomplete. Harry assumed it was emotional pain. He never pressed. He believed that love didn't require a full inventory of the past. Until now. The message lingered in his mind. Ask her about 2010. It was specific. Intentional. That was the year Meghan seemed to vanish from the screen. No acting credits. No public appearances. No paparazzi photos. A full year unaccounted for. And now, a source claimed it was tied to a child. If it were false, it could be refuted easily. If it were true. Harry wasn't sure he could even begin to process what that meant. He didn't confront Meghan right away. He watched. Quietly. Closely. Looking for anything that felt off. Her reactions. Her guarded moments. Her tone when the topic of her past came up. He started asking casual questions. Where were you living in 2010 again? Who were you spending time with? The answers came quickly, but they lacked the detail she usually provided. There was a new edge to her tone. A rehearsed cadence. Harry didn't push. He just nodded, filed it away, and retreated into his thoughts. He needed certainty, not accusations, not assumptions. He needed answers rooted in facts, not emotion. That's when he made the call. Quietly, discreetly, he contacted a private investigator in Los Angeles. Someone far outside the royal radar. A man known for uncovering the untraceable. A former intelligence analyst turned private tracker. He was told one thing. Look into 2010. Trace everything. Every address, every alias, every record. Leave no stone unturned. And do it without alerting anyone, not even my wife. The investigator went to work. What he found wasn't immediate proof, but it was disturbing enough to deepen the investigation. Meghan had used 2 aliases to register medical appointments in California that year. She had rented a small property under a family friend's name. She had stayed off the grid. No social posts, no tagged photos, no trips documented in the usual celebrity trails. She had essentially disappeared for 8 months. Why? Then came the first major breakthrough. A lead connected to a woman who had been close to Meghan during her early acting days, an old friend, long removed from the spotlight, who now worked as a school administrator in a quiet suburban district. She didn't want to talk at first, but the investigator persisted. Finally, she said one thing that changed the course of everything. There's a boy. Looks just like her. Lies with someone she knew years ago. She used to visit once or twice a year, never spoke of him publicly. Always said it wasn't the right time. The investigator asked for records. School registration. Medical history. Anything with a name. The surname didn't match Meghan's. The address was in a modest middle-class neighborhood far from Montecito. No paparazzi. No headlines. The child was listed as being born in early 2011. That would put the conception somewhere in mid-2010. The timeline matched. But was it real? The investigator pushed harder. Over weeks, he watched the property. Photographed comings and goings. Tracked who picked the boy up from school. He was being raised by an older woman, early 60s. A former neighbor of Meghan's from her Toronto days, now based in California. But the biggest break came when the investigator managed to obtain a discarded personal item from the boy. A used tissue reportedly retrieved from a public bin after the child's guardian discarded it near a local pharmacy. Legally risky. Morally questionable. But scientifically effective. With that tissue in hand, and a known DNA sample from Meghan, acquired from archived items stored in entertainment databases, the investigator sent the materials to a private lab. The results would take 2 weeks. In the meantime, whispers began to multiply. People who had stayed silent for years started to speak, quietly, anonymously. A hairstylist from a suit shoot remembered Meghan disappearing for months. A nurse at a small clinic swore she saw Meghan once with a baby, though no public record ever matched. A photographer recalled a man who paid him not to release certain photos from 2011 showing Meghan in maternity clothing, walking with a baby stroller in Pasadena. All hearsay. But together, a mosaic of silence began to take shape. Back in Montecito, Harry grew more withdrawn. He stopped taking calls from friends. He canceled an appearance at a veterans event in San Diego. Those around him thought it was stress, exhaustion, the weight of fame. But something was brewing beneath his composed exterior, something heavy, something that made it hard to sleep. When the lab finally called, the results were clear. It was not speculation. It was not a probability. It was scientific fact. The DNA of the boy matched Meghan Markle's sample with 99.9% certainty. She was the biological mother. No doubt. No ambiguity. The whisper had become a scream. Harry collapsed, both metaphorically and physically. According to a source close to the couple, he was alone at the time, reading the report, staring at the data, rereading it as if the numbers might change the second time around. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He simply stopped moving, sat in silence. His heart reportedly raced. His mind clouded. A moment of utter disbelief consumed him, followed by a single question. Why didn't she tell me? This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about the theft of choice. He could have handled the truth. He could have embraced the child. But the fact that she withheld it, deliberately, silently, shattered the foundation of trust between them. What else hadn't she said? What other chapters had she rewritten? To those outside the marriage, the truth was scandalous. But to Harry, it was something deeper, a confirmation that the woman he defended against the world had kept a world of her own hidden from him. And perhaps more painfully, that he had never really been allowed into that world at all. The whispers from the past had become deafening. And now, for the first time since leaving the royal family, Prince Harry had no idea what came next. The idea of launching a private investigation into someone you share your life with is not a decision made lightly. For Prince Harry, it wasn't born from paranoia or malice. It was born from a whisper that wouldn't go away, a crack in the surface of a story he once believed was airtight. After days of torment, inner conflict, and failed attempts to suppress the unease, Harry chose what few husbands, let alone princes, would dare: to investigate his own wife. He couldn't ask palisades. He couldn't turn to old royal handlers. He couldn't risk the British tabloids catching wind of anything. If this was going to happen, it had to be in total secrecy. He needed someone with discretion, skill, and most importantly, no ties to the royal family. Through a trusted American contact, someone he had met during his military engagements, Harry was referred to a man known only in circles that operated behind closed doors, Elliot Mason, a former intelligence officer turned high-level private investigator. Mason wasn't your average gumshoe. He didn't carry a camera around his neck or follow cheating spouses through hotel lobbies. He specialized in complex identity cases, tracking down missing people, confirming biological relationships, and uncovering hidden pasts that spanned continents. He was the kind of man corporations hired to vet billion-dollar mergers, the man celebrities used to trace extortionists without alerting the press. And when Harry met with him, Mason didn't even blink. "I want to know what happened in 2010, Harry said plainly. "There are gaps. I want clarity. Nothing more. Nothing less." Mason leaned forward. "You don't just want clarity. You want confirmation of something you already suspect." Harry didn't respond. He didn't have to. They agreed on complete confidentiality. No written contracts. Payment wired in increments through proxies. Mason began the very next morning. He didn't start with surveillance. He started with records. Public ones. Private ones. Scrubbed ones. He accessed documents from Toronto, Los Angeles, and even Mexico, where Meghan had once vacationed under another name. He compiled timelines. Work permits. Union records. Travel manifests. But again, it all led back to the same year, 2010. A ghost year. One where Meghan Markle, then an aspiring actress with moderate success, simply disappeared from the public radar. Her IMDb profile had nothing listed. No auditions. No interviews. No press junkets. It was as though she had ceased to exist for an entire year. That's rare in show business, where even inactivity gets documented in speculation. Mason knew what that usually meant. Someone wanted it that way. Then came the breakthrough. Mason found that in early 2010, Meghan had used an alias, Rachel M. Grant, to check into a private women's wellness facility in California. The clinic specialized in discreet prenatal care for high-profile clients. It wasn't listed online. It had no public front. It existed solely to provide care without press interference. Mason obtained a former employee's cooperation, anonymously, off the record. According to her, Rachel Grant came in for multiple visits over 6 months, always alone, never allowing anyone to accompany her. No digital medical records were kept. Everything was paper-based to prevent leaks. Mason needed more. He dug into real estate transactions. Meghan had, through a proxy, leased a modest 2-bedroom guest house on the outskirts of Santa Monica. The landlord, who remembered her vaguely, said she stayed from April 2010 through February 2011. Paid in cash. No personal interactions. She just vanished one day, he recalled. Around this time, Mason expanded his scope. He began interviewing people from Meghan's old life. Friends, ex-colleagues, neighbors from Toronto. Many didn't want to talk. Some were evasive. A few hinted without saying too much. There were things she went through that we weren't supposed to ask about, said one. She had a past she was trying to leave behind, said another. One person finally gave Mason a direct lead. A woman named Karina Delgado, a quiet figure from Meghan's pre-fame life, known to have lived with Meghan briefly in California. Delgado now resided near San Jose and worked as a caregiver. When approached, she was hesitant until Mason mentioned Harry. At that moment, something shifted in her tone. She told me she was protecting him, Karina said. She said it would ruin everything if he knew. That she had made peace with it, that it was better left in the past. What did she make peace with? Mason asked. Karina didn't answer with words. She showed him a photo, a framed picture, slightly faded. It showed a toddler boy, perhaps age 3 or 4, sitting on Karina's lap. In the corner of the photo was a handwritten date, July 2014. Mason asked the boy's name. Karina said it had been changed intentionally. She wouldn't reveal what it had been before, but she added something else. She came to visit once a year, always with gifts, always with love, but never with the truth. Not to him, not to the world. Now Mason knew where to go. He tracked down school records using known addresses. The boy, now around 12 years old, was enrolled under the last name Douglas at a private middle school in Sacramento. His guardian was listed as Karina's older sister, who had no biological relation to him. There were no father's details on record. The emergency contact was blank. Mason observed the child from a distance, photographed him leaving school, compared facial structures to Meghan. There were undeniable resemblances, the nose, the eyes, even the distinctive smile. It wasn't proof. But it was close. Too close to ignore. That's when Mason decided to obtain a biological sample. He followed the child's guardian to a pharmacy, waited until she discarded a tissue the child had used, and retrieved it from the trash. Then he submitted it, alongside a hair sample from Meghan pulled from an old suit set wardrobe still stored in an archive facility for analysis. The test would take 2 weeks. While he waited, Mason compiled every file, photo, and timestamp into a master dossier. He included testimonial summaries, financial records, real estate data, and behavioral analysis. There were no gaping holes left. Everything pointed to one conclusion. Meghan had given birth to a child in early 2011. That child was living under another name, and she had never told Prince Harry. Harry didn't receive the dossier until the night before the results came in. Mason delivered it in person, handed over the sealed envelope. Harry didn't open it immediately. He sat with it for a long time, holding it as though it might burn through his hands. Finally, he asked only one question. Do you believe it's true? Mason didn't hesitate. I don't deal in belief. I deal in evidence. And everything points to yes. Harry nodded, then opened the envelope. Inside was not just the summary of findings, but a complete reframing of Meghan's life before him. A life Harry never knew existed. Not because he was naive, not because he didn't care, but because she had chosen not to let him in. And now, he was staring at proof that the love story he had defended so fiercely might have been built on a foundation that never truly included him in full. The next day, the call came. The DNA results were in. It was official. The boy was Meghan Markle's biological child. And just like that, the investigation ended. But for Prince Harry, the unraveling had only just begun. At first, the connection seemed impossible. A coincidence. A resemblance so slight it could be explained away by imagination. But for those who had seen Meghan Markle up close, for those who studied her facial expressions, her features, the shape of her jaw, and the arch of her brows, the moment they saw the boy, it was like being hit by a wave. He had her eyes, not just in color or size, but in their expression. He looked at the world the way she did when cameras weren't watching, alert, analytical, slightly guarded. And for the people who had been part of the private investigation, there was no longer any doubt. This was Meghan's son. The boy lived in a quiet cul-de-sac in Sacramento, California. The kind of place where neighbors wave from their porches and everyone keeps to themselves. He had been enrolled in the same school district since kindergarten, never moved houses, and had reportedly lived under the care of a woman listed on school records as his legal guardian. The woman, Frances Delgado, was in her early 60s. She claimed no biological relation to the boy but had power of attorney. She wasn't just a caregiver, she was a gatekeeper. Observers noted the boy's routine. He was punctual, polite, and quiet. He played soccer after school, often alone. He had a favorite hoodie, navy blue with a faded logo. Teachers described him as intelligent but reserved. He didn't talk much about family. He didn't bring visitors to school events. There were no photos of parents in his locker. No signature on the parent-teacher forms except Francis Delgado's careful cursive. But he had Meghan's smile. The investigation team watched silently for days. They didn't interact. They documented, cross-referenced, analyzed. It wasn't just about how the boy looked. It was how his history aligned perfectly with Meghan's hidden chapter. His birth certificate, obtained through back-channel contacts, was registered in January 2011. No father listed. The mother's name was redacted under a privacy protection clause common in adoption and guardianship filings. But the facility of birth matched the clinic Meghan had secretly visited in 2010 under an alias. Prince Harry hadn't seen the boy yet. He had read the reports, seen the photos, absorbed the timeline. But nothing could have prepared him for the images captured on a quiet spring afternoon, a high-resolution series of photographs showing the boy walking home from school. In one, he's looking to the side, distracted by something in the distance. In another, he's laughing at something a classmate said, his head tilted slightly back. That was the one that gutted Harry. Because it wasn't just a smile. It was Meghan's exact expression. The same one she wore when she tried to hide amusement during awkward interviews. The same one that charmed audiences during her first royal walkabouts. The same one Harry had fallen in love with. And now it was on the face of a child he never knew existed. When Harry received the photos, he was alone again. No staff, no advisors, no Meghan. He sat on a balcony overlooking the California hills, the file open in his lap. For nearly an hour, he didn't move. Just stared. Page after page. The same child in different settings riding a bike, drawing with chalk, feeding ducks at a nearby pond. Moments of innocence. Moments of a childhood lived in complete secrecy from him. The rage didn't come immediately. First came numbness. Then came the question that would haunt him for days. How could she keep this from me? Harry wasn't naive. He understood that people have pasts. That life before love is messy, complicated, often painful. But a child? A living, breathing child? That wasn't just a secret. That was an entire chapter erased. And Meghan hadn't just omitted it. She had constructed an entire new version of her past, one scrubbed clean of any trace of motherhood. Back in Sacramento, the boy remained unaware of the storm brewing around his existence. He went to school, came home, ate dinner. He watched cartoons and asked questions about outer space. He doodled dragons in the corners of his notebooks. To him, Meghan Markle was not a mother who abandoned him. She was simply an absent figure in a story never fully told. Francis Delgado, according to brief interviews with neighbors, referred to the boy as her nephew, though no one knew how they were actually related. One neighbor, who requested anonymity, said the boy had only received one notable visitor over the last year. A tall woman with dark hair and sunglasses, who came in a black SUV and left within 20 minutes. The description fit Meghan. The vehicle matched one seen entering and exiting her Montecito compound. But she had never publicly acknowledged these trips. She had never been photographed near the home. She had never once included this child in her carefully curated image of motherhood. Publicly, Meghan portrayed herself as a fiercely devoted mother. Every interview, every documentary, every anecdote centered around Archie and Lilibet. The bedtime stories, the chickens they raised, the family garden. But in none of these narratives did this boy exist. Not even in passing. Not even as a vague allusion to another life. He had been erased. And now, the consequences of that erasure were coming to life. Harry struggled with what to do next. He had the truth, the DNA, the timeline, the photographs. But he had no explanation, no confession. Meghan had said nothing. She continued on as if nothing had changed. And perhaps, for her, it hadn't. Perhaps she believed that the past belonged in the past, that she had the right to choose what parts of herself she brought into her new life. But that belief collided head-on with Harry's reality. For Harry, family had always been complicated. He had lost his mother in the most public, traumatic way possible. He had grown up under scrutiny, isolated within palace walls, taught to smile through pain. When he finally escaped, he did so in the name of protecting his family. And now, he was confronted with the realization that the very person he had fled to might have denied him the chance to be part of a family he never even knew he had. There were legal questions. Ethical ones. Would he confront Meghan directly? Would he try to reach the child? Did he even have the right to? And then there were the emotional questions, the ones without answers. What would the boy think if he learned the truth? Would he feel abandoned? Would he feel betrayed? The photographs didn't just show a child. They showed possibility. What if Harry had known earlier? What if he had been allowed to meet the boy? Could they have built something? Could Harry have helped raise him alongside Archie and Lilibet? Would things have turned out differently? At the heart of the storm was the image that refused to leave Harry's mind. The boy laughing in the sunlight. Meghan's smile stretching across a face that had never seen his. A face that belonged to someone who shared his wife's blood, but not her name. The resemblance was undeniable. And so was the pain. In the coming days, Harry would be forced to make decisions no man should have to face alone. But before any confrontation, before any questions were asked, he needed one thing he no longer had: peace. Because once you've seen a child who looks into the world with familiar eyes that hold your wife's secrets, nothing is ever the same again. It was the final piece. The only thing standing between suspicion and certainty. For weeks, Prince Harry had agonized in silence, living in the purgatory between what he feared and what he could prove. But now, with a single envelope, the truth had arrived. Cold, scientific, irrefutable. A laboratory's verdict rendered in numbers and charts, detailing the intimate biological reality that would forever change his life. The DNA test was conducted by a discreet private genetics lab based in Northern California. Known for its non-disclosure policies and its reputation for servicing high-net-worth clients and confidential government cases, the lab operated under layers of privacy. No names, no photographs, no context. Just samples. A swab from the child, obtained legally through discarded tissue, and a genetic reference sourced from archived materials connected to Meghan Markle's earlier public life. The lab cross-referenced 15 loci, standard markers used in paternity and maternity tests. Every single one matched. The result? A 99.999% probability that Meghan Markle was the biological mother of the boy. Harry read that line again and again. He didn't need a second opinion. He didn't need further explanation. That one sentence crushed every lingering hope that this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, or some cruel impersonation. It was final, definitive, and yet it felt impossible. The woman he had trusted above all else had built a life with him while shielding the existence of her first child. Not one mention, not one hint, even in their most vulnerable conversations, even during their most honest moments. He had opened up about Diana, about his grief, about the trauma of losing his mother and growing up inside an institution that treated emotion as weakness. He had laid himself bare, and now he was left to wonder if any of it had truly been reciprocated. The room felt colder. The walls seemed to close in. The documents trembled slightly in his hands, though he wasn't aware he was shaking. He set them down gently, then stood and walked out onto the balcony. Below, the California sun warmed the hills, birds chirped, the world moved on, indifferent to his private catastrophe. He closed his eyes, willing the pain to make sense, to reduce itself into something manageable. But it wouldn't. This wasn't just personal. It was seismic. If this information became public, and it inevitably would, the implications would ripple beyond Harry and Meghan's marriage. It would touch the royal family, the media, the legal system, and the vast empire the couple had built on the foundation of trust and authenticity. How could they continue to stand as voices of honesty and healing when such a massive truth had been hidden? He paced the room, replaying every interaction with Meghan through a new lens. Her reluctance to speak about certain years. Her carefully vague answers during interviews. The way she once changed the subject when he brought up children before their own were born. It was all there, in hindsight. A pattern of redirection. A calculated silence. And he had missed it. Worse, he had defended her. Fought for her. Alienated his family. Endured tabloid warfare. Braved accusations of betrayal, all to shield her from the very kind of scrutiny that might have uncovered this secret years ago. The irony tasted bitter. The call came from Elliot Mason, the investigator, moments later. "It's confirmed," Mason said without preamble. "I know," Harry replied. His voice was hollow. "Do you want to proceed with Phase 2? Mason asked. There was a pause. A long one. No, Harry? Harry hung up and sat down, alone once more. He thought of Archie and Lilibet, of the life they were growing into, of the legacy he wanted to leave them. What would they think, years from now, when they learned they had an older half-sibling their mother never mentioned? Would they see it as betrayal? As abandonment? Or as something else, something more painful? Erasure? The DNA report remained open on the table. Cold, clinical, unfeeling. It didn't care about consequences. It didn't understand the weight it carried. It simply delivered truth. And that truth had just detonated inside Harry's life like a silent bomb. In Buckingham Palace, the reaction to the unfolding situation was a mix of disbelief and dread. Though the DNA results had not yet reached official channels, whispers of Harry's investigation had begun to circulate among certain royal aides. One source close to the palace confided that King Charles had been informed Harry was under considerable emotional strain, but was not told the reason. The Queen consort, Camilla, reportedly asked outright whether the couple was divorcing. William, Harry's brother, was said to have remained silent. No calls were exchanged. No texts. The rift between them, already deep, was only widening. Royal insiders feared what this could mean for the monarchy's image. While Harry and Meghan had stepped back from their official roles, their every move still carried the weight of royal association. A hidden child, concealed from a royal spouse, wasn't just a tabloid story, it was a constitutional curiosity. Had this child been born during Harry and Meghan's time as working royals, there might have been legal implications surrounding succession, lineage, or even security protocols. Then came the practical questions. Who else knew? Had Meghan confided in anyone? Did her mother, Doria, know? Had there been an arrangement made years ago to keep the child's existence a secret, with money, documents, and aliases used to preserve the illusion? It was too much. And yet, it had only just begun. Back in California, Harry sat in the silence of his home, unable to shake the images from his mind, the boy's eyes, the subtle smile, the undeniable resemblance. What was he supposed to do now? March into a confrontation? Wait for Meghan to confess? Go public? He wasn't ready. That night, he didn't sleep. He wandered the halls, checked in on his children, stood silently outside their bedrooms. He watched their small, sleeping forms and wondered what they would one day think of this moment. Would they blame him for not knowing? Would they forgive Meghan? Would they understand that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we know the least? The DNA test was meant to provide answers, but it had only raised more questions. What happens to a marriage when a child enters the equation, not one born of betrayal during the relationship, but one born before it, concealed not out of shame but, perhaps, strategy? What happens to love when trust is broken not by action, but by omission? What happens to a man who gave up everything to escape secrets, only to be swallowed by one? As the first light of dawn broke through the curtains, Harry sat at the kitchen table, the DNA report still in front of him, unchanged, unforgiving. He stared at the line that had ended the illusion. Meghan Markle, biological mother. He exhaled, long and slow. Some truths destroy everything. Others demand that you rebuild. This one did both. The moment Prince Harry received the final DNA results, confirming what deep down he had begun to fear, something inside him gave way. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't involve shattered glasses or shouted accusations. It was silent, still, internal. The kind of collapse that doesn't break the body first, it breaks the soul. He had prepared for bad news. Or so he thought. But no amount of preparation could brace him for what it felt like to look at a black and white document that unraveled the very core of his marriage. Meghan had a child. She was that child's biological mother. And she had hidden it. For over a decade. Even from the man she said she loved above all else. He didn't cry right away. At first, he simply stood up and walked to the far end of the room, placing his hands against the wall as if bracing for an impact that had already happened. He stared at nothing. His breathing grew shallow. He couldn't hear anything. Not the clock on the wall, not the hum of the refrigerator, not the distant sounds of California life outside his window. There was just a deafening silence in his head, the kind of silence that screams. Then he collapsed. According to a household staff member who was nearby at the time, he fell to his knees slowly, as if his legs could no longer carry the weight of the revelation. He didn't call for help. He didn't speak. He simply remained there, bent forward slightly, his hands on the floor, his eyes wide but unfocused. The staff member thought he might have fainted and rushed to assist him. But when they reached him, Harry was conscious, pale, trembling, but aware. "Leave me," he reportedly said. "Just leave me." For hours he didn't move from the floor. He sat in silence, replaying every conversation he had ever had with Meghan, every moment he had defended her, every speech he gave about truth, about freedom, about family. Now he was the one left in the dark. And worse, he realized the betrayal wasn't just about the secret, it was about what that secret meant. She had chosen not to tell him. She had weighed the consequences, measured the risk, and decided to build a life with him while hiding a child born long before they met. It wasn't a case of omission out of fear. It was a calculated decision, and that truth gutted him more than anything else. In Montecito, the house was quiet. Meghan was away for a scheduled appearance at a charity event. Archie and Lilibet were with a nanny in another wing of the property. For all intents and purposes, Harry was alone, completely alone, with the truth. Later that evening, he wandered into his study. He pulled out old photographs. Their engagement, their wedding, Archie's birth, the Oprah interview, all of it. He laid them out on the table beside the DNA results, as if trying to weigh truth against illusion. Had all of it been a performance? Was any of it real? He thought about his mother, Princess Diana. He thought about how she had been silenced, manipulated, left to suffer alone. He had vowed never to let history repeat itself. He had promised to protect his own wife from that same system. But what if the person he was protecting her from wasn't the outside world, but from accountability? The memories came like waves. Meghan sitting across from him on the grass during that first interview with Oprah, speaking of honesty and pain. Meghan writing her children's book about fatherhood. Meghan holding Archie's hand in front of a camera, speaking of parenting. All of it rang differently now. Not as lies, but as narratives. Stories told selectively. Stories missing one crucial chapter. At one point, Harry opened his laptop and began drafting a letter. He didn't know who it was to, perhaps Meghan, perhaps himself. The words came slowly, then faster. "You told me you loved me. You said we had no secrets. You said we would raise our children together. How could you not tell me about your first?" He stopped, deleted the lines, started again, then deleted them again. There were no words that could contain the magnitude of the pain. The collapse wasn't just physical. It was emotional, psychological. Over the next few days, Harry withdrew from everyone. He skipped scheduled calls with business partners. He didn't return texts from friends. He reportedly ignored messages from royal staff in the UK. Aides close to King Charles began to grow concerned. William was notified but did not reach out. The relationship between the brothers remained fractured, and Harry had made it clear months earlier that he didn't want unsolicited involvement. According to sources inside their Montecito estate, Harry refused to eat for nearly 48 hours. He wandered the grounds, stared into the horizon, often returning with tears in his eyes. The only people he allowed near him were the children, and even then, he was quiet, distant, protective. One nanny reportedly overheard him whisper to Archie during a bedtime routine, "I'll always tell you the truth. I promise you that." No matter what. When Meghan returned from her charity event, she knew something was wrong. The house felt different. The energy had shifted. She found Harry in the study, sitting silently in the dark, the DNA envelope open on the desk beside him. She didn't ask what was wrong. She looked at the papers. And then she knew. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Meghan finally asked, "How long have you known?" Harry didn't answer right away. "Long enough," he said. She tried to explain. "I was going to tell you." "When?" Harry cut in. His voice wasn't angry. It was flat, hollow. "After our children grew up? After we moved on to something else? After the boy became a headline?" Meghan remained silent. Harry stood up and walked out of the room. That night, he didn't sleep beside her. By the next morning, news outlets were already speculating about marital trouble. Harry had missed an appearance at a veterans' mental health summit. A close friend anonymously told a British tabloid that he was not well. The royal press machine buzzed with curiosity but held back on the bigger story, largely because no one yet had the full truth. Harry's collapse wasn't the end of the ordeal. It was the beginning. The unraveling had started. Now the choices lay ahead. Would he go public? Would he try to contact the child? Would he stay in the marriage? For a man who had built his identity around loyalty, fatherhood, and truth, the answers were not simple. They were devastatingly complex. Because some betrayals don't end in screams or slam doors. They end in silence. In empty glances across dinner tables. In cold beds. In unsaid words, Harry's collapse wasn't just about being blindsided by a hidden child. It was about the realization that he had become everything he feared, a prince standing in a castle of illusions, betrayed not by the crown, but by the person he trusted most. If discovering that Meghan had a child before their relationship had sent Prince Harry into emotional freefall, the next question waiting in the shadows was equally haunting. Who was the father? It wasn't just a matter of curiosity or jealousy. This question struck at the very core of what Harry now feared, that the child Meghan had hidden from the world may not have just been a remnant of her past, but a connection she had actively tried to bury. And worse, it meant that there might be another man, somewhere out there, who had fathered a child with her and had also been erased from the story. In the days following the DNA confirmation, Harry's thoughts turned obsessively to this question. If Meghan had chosen to conceal the child, had she also concealed the identity of the father? Had she cut him off? Paid him off? Was the father even aware the child existed? Was he alive? Was he someone from her public dating history or a name that had never made it to the press? There were no easy answers. Meghan, after the initial confrontation, refused to offer further details. "It doesn't matter now," she said. "It's in the past. It doesn't change what we have." But to Harry it did. Everything had changed, and the fact that she wouldn't name the father only deepened his suspicion. He turned again to the private investigator, Elliot Mason, who had already proven capable of uncovering layers of truth that no one else could reach. Mason had anticipated the question. In fact, he had already begun digging. The first logical step was to analyze Meghan's known relationships around the time of the child's conception, which would have been sometime between March and May 2010. Publicly, Meghan was not in a confirmed relationship during that time. She was newly divorced from Trevor Engelson, with whom she had been married for just under 2 years. That divorce was finalized in 2013, but they had separated well before that. Trevor's timeline didn't align. Mason pulled records, photos, and social media entries from the 2009 to 2011 period. The results painted a picture of a woman who was socially active, moving in and out of entertainment circles in Los Angeles and Toronto, frequently traveling but never documenting too much. There were mentions of a businessman she had been linked to, a hedge fund manager based in New York. Another rumor involved a high-profile entertainment lawyer who had briefly represented her during her transition from small acting roles to larger contracts. Then, a breakthrough. Buried in archived footage from a 2010 Hollywood charity gala, Meghan was spotted speaking closely with a man named Julian Ray. Not a household name, but known in elite social circles, Julian was a film producer with a reputation for discretion and involvement in several projects tied to Meghan's early film career. At the time, he had recently been divorced. Paparazzi photos showed the two of them leaving the event together. No follow-ups. No tabloid stories. But the proximity and timing were enough to merit further investigation. Mason tracked Julian to a quiet life in Aspen, Colorado, where he now ran a boutique investment firm. He had stepped away from the entertainment world nearly a decade earlier, citing fatigue with the industry. When contacted under the guise of an unrelated inquiry, Julian declined an interview. But his public profile revealed something startling. He had no known children, no marriages after his divorce, no mention of family. But there was something else. Julian had once been involved in a legal dispute over non-disclosure agreements. He had filed an injunction in 2011 against an entertainment outlet attempting to publish false and intrusive claims about his private life. The documents were sealed. The timing, again, was suspiciously aligned with the child's birth. It wasn't concrete evidence, but it was a trail. Mason began speaking with Julian's former assistant, a woman named Claire who had worked with him during his Hollywood years. After some coaxing and assurances of anonymity, she shared an observation that sent shockwaves through the investigation. Julian changed after 2010, she said. He became withdrawn, private, like he was carrying something big. One time he told me he'd made a mistake, something personal, but wouldn't explain. He said it would never see the light of day if he could help it. Was that mistake a child? The investigators attempted to acquire a DNA sample from Julian through indirect means, but he proved careful and inaccessible. Short of a voluntary test or a legal case, there would be no definitive answer. But the circumstantial evidence, timing, connection, and his known silence built a strong possibility that he might be the father. The other theory floated within some of Meghan's older circles was far more unsettling. A few whispered that the father had never known, that he had a brief affair with Meghan, never even aware she had become pregnant, that she chose to carry the child alone, cutting ties immediately to prevent entanglements. This theory raised ethical questions. If true, it meant the child not only had been denied the right to know his mother, but also the truth of his paternity. And it meant the father, whoever he was, might one day discover he had a son through a headline, a lawsuit, or a chance encounter. As Harry grappled with these possibilities, the emotional toll deepened. The idea that another man had fathered a child with Meghan was not inherently unbearable. Harry wasn't naive or possessive. He understood people have histories. But it was the secrecy that wrecked him. The erasure of this person. The refusal to name him. The fog of ambiguity surrounding something so important. Harry began having nightmares. He'd wake in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, imagining a faceless man standing between him and his family. In his dreams, the man never spoke, never moved, just stood there, watching. It wasn't jealousy. It was the fear that something was deeply unfinished, and it was haunting his subconscious. He started writing letters he never intended to send. To the child. I don't know what you've been told. I don't know what you believe. But if you ever wonder who I am, I'm the man who should have known you existed. I'm sorry. To the father, whoever he might be. If you didn't know, then you deserve to. And if you did, and stayed silent, I'll never understand why. Either way, I hope you know he deserves more. And to Meghan. You once told me truth was the only way forward. Why didn't that include him? But the letters were never mailed. They stayed locked in a drawer. Meanwhile, legal experts began to whisper about potential ramifications. If the father could be identified and had been deliberately excluded, there might be grounds for legal proceedings. And if Meghan had ever paid for silence, directly or indirectly, there could be deeper implications. The media hadn't caught on yet. But if they did, the question of who is the father wouldn't be just emotional, it would be a legal, social, and reputational grenade. The world knew Harry as a man who valued transparency. His advocacy for mental health, his memoir, his interviews, all framed him as someone committed to breaking cycles of silence. Now, he was trapped in one. And the key to unlocking it sat in a part of Meghan's past she refused to open. In the end, Harry was left with no name. Just a theory. Just the crushing realization that there may always be a part of his wife's life, his children's family story, that he would never fully understand. He could confront. He could plead. But the truth about the child's father, unless freely given, might remain just out of reach. Some questions have answers. Some have ghosts. And this one haunted him more than any other. The question haunted every room Prince Harry walked into, hung in the air like smoke. Why did Meghan hide the child? It wasn't enough to know that the child existed, or that he had Meghan's smile, her blood, her bone, or that Harry now carried the unbearable knowledge that someone so central to his life had hidden something so crucial. What truly tormented him, what unraveled him, was not just the act, but the intent, the decision, the silence, the lie. Why did she do it? Was it shame? Strategy? Was it survival? Or something far darker? When Harry finally confronted Meghan again, the exchange wasn't filled with shouting. There was no melodramatic scene, no slammed doors, no sobbing confessions. Instead, it was still, quiet, heavy. Two people sitting on opposite ends of a living room couch, the air between them thicker than any words could cut. Harry asked her once, without rage, just clarity. Why didn't you tell me? Meghan took a long breath. She didn't cry. She didn't deny. She simply said, because I didn't want to lose everything again. That was the beginning of an explanation that would only raise more questions. Meghan said the child was a product of a relationship that wasn't meant to last. She didn't name the father. She said the pregnancy wasn't planned. That at the time, she was lost, professionally, emotionally, spiritually. She was caught between a fading career and a public identity she hadn't yet crafted. The baby arrived quietly, she said, in a clinic away from the public eye, raised by someone she trusted, someone who would care for him and keep him safe from the scrutiny of the world. I wasn't ready, she told Harry, not to be a mother, not to face what it would cost me. I made the decision to step away, to keep him safe. But Harry couldn't reconcile that. How do you love a child so much that you hide them from the world, yet not enough to stand beside them in it? I would have understood, he told her. You say that now, Meghan replied. No, he said. I say that because it's true. But Meghan was unmoved. She insisted that it wasn't about deceit. It was about protection. She said that once she entered the spotlight, there was no going back. If the child had been revealed, he would have become a target, a curiosity, a scandal. Her career, her credibility, her every choice would have been defined by it. And then, when she met Harry, the stakes became even higher. I didn't know if we would last, she said. And once we did, once we became public, it was too late. I couldn't figure out how to undo the lie without undoing everything else. Harry was stunned, not because he hadn't expected some version of this, but because of how calmly she delivered it. As though this was a calculated trade-off she had learned to live with. I gave up my family for you, he said. I walked away from my past. And you didn't trust me with yours. Meghan didn't respond. He asked again, do you regret him? No, she said quickly. Never. I regret the circumstances. I regret not being strong enough to face the world with him. But that was the root of Harry's pain. He couldn't understand why she didn't feel strong enough with him by her side. Had she underestimated him? Had she assumed he would leave? Had she believed that even the man who had taken on the monarchy itself would buckle under the weight of a secret child? Or had she always known he would accept the truth, but preferred the lie because it preserved her narrative? Meghan had built herself into a symbol of perseverance, of injustice, of resilience. Her story was one of fighting back against oppression, racism, tradition, and betrayal. That was the brand. That was the image. That was the power. A child from her past, concealed and unexplained, would complicate that image. And perhaps to her, that risk wasn't worth it. Harry thought of all the moments in their relationship when honesty was preached like gospel. In interviews, in memoir drafts, in therapy sessions. They had vowed to be transparent, even when it hurt. And yet, the most significant truth had been withheld by the very person who championed truth the loudest. He wondered if others knew. Had Doria, Meghan's mother, known? Had her close friends? If so, that meant he had been the only one left in the dark. The only one asked to build a life based on selective truth. What disturbed him most was the pattern, the revisions of her past, the redacted timelines, the carefully polished story. Meghan hadn't just omitted the child. She had constructed a new reality, one where he never existed. And that took effort, deliberate choices, a system of silence maintained over years. Harry tried to understand. He spoke to therapists, confided in one or two trusted friends. They asked hard questions. Some tried to be neutral. Maybe she was afraid, one friend said. Maybe she believed the lie was the only way forward. But Harry couldn't see it that way. Because if you lie to the person you sleep beside, raise children with, build a public crusade alongside, what else do you lie about? He began writing again. Not public statements. Just thoughts. In his journal, he pinned, "You weren't afraid of the world. You were afraid of the truth inside yourself. And now that truth has broken us both." Still, part of him empathized. He knew what it was like to grow up in the eye of a storm.